The information processing store model is one model in the information processing approach that attempts to explain how information changes as it moves through the system. It's called the store model because it focuses on three major memory stores: sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. So it will examine how information changes as we take it from the environment and as it moves through these different pieces of the system and then comes back out when we try to recall and use information. This model starts with the environment. There's a lot of different information in the environment, sights and sounds and all sorts of different stimuli that come from the environment that are taken in by our sensory receptors. Our sensory receptors, as you may remember from your introductory psychology class, are our skin, eyes, tongue, ears, and nose. These sensory receptors only pick up a small proportion of the information from the environment. Once this information is picked up by the sensory receptors, it is turned into a stimulus that can then be processed. This stimulus is then sent to the sensory memory. Sensory memory is interesting in that it holds a large amount of information, but only for a very, very brief period of time. For example, for sight, it only holds information in there for about half a second. For sound, which is the longest capacity in sensory memory, it holds information for about 3 to 4 seconds. Once information is in sensory memory, if we pay attention to it, it will get into our working memory. Our working memory is an active workbench that we can use to process information. So we can take information and work on it when we're solving problems. We can take it and rehearse it in this area to help get it into the next store, which is long-term memory. Or we can just use it, and if we don't pay attention to it for an extended period of time, it will eventually just disappear. Working memory has a limited amount of both time and capacity, so it can only hold information in there for about 20 seconds on average unless we're actively thinking about it. And for an adult, it holds approximately 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information. But there are a lot of other components to it that take up some of that space. So if we are processing information like trying to add numbers together or trying to formulate thoughts, that takes up some of that working memory space as well, and so the number of pieces of information goes down from 7. If we take that information and we encode it, we process it in some way that we can get it into our long-term memory, then it can be stored in our long-term memory for seemingly an unlimited amount of time. So it will store information permanently for as much information as we can possibly remember for as long as we can remember it. Then we can take that information from long-term memory and we can use the process of retrieval to pull it back into working memory, where we can then once again actively process that information. The central executive is oftentimes thought of as part of working memory. It's the part that is our conscious part of the mind that helps us to coordinate incoming information with information from the rest of the system. So it helps to, for example, focus our attention so that we can take certain things in from sensory memory. It helps us to process information that we already have in working memory, and it helps us to pick out what information we want to retrieve from long-term memory so that we can retrieve that information and actively process it. Then once we are done processing information, we have our output, which comes out of our working memory.